We are now live. All right. Hey, welcome. This is Jesse Nelson, and
Edwin
here are the
Jones.
ministers of Lenore City Church of Christ. And we're coming back at you with another daily Bible reading. Yesterday we did it from,
Just to kind of keep them on their
yeah, we're
toes.
changing locations all over the place. And so I'm home, he's in his office. And I'm not going to do a huge catching us up, only because if you've been following along with our daily Bible reading, you've hopefully been caught up. So we're getting into the last two chapters of Zechariah, and what we're going to see is the ultimate purification. He's kind of been layering it with the leaders, and now we're going to look at some of the prophets, shepherds, all that kind of stuff. But what we're going to end with is the grand finale of the the messianic kingdom and all the symbols that God uses to kind of represent what that will be like. And that's kind of left, just kind of ends.
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the things about this that will be interesting in the future, not too distant future, is that Malachi, the last part of Zechariah and Malachi, have a lot in
Yep.
common.
Yeah. A lot of these Day of the Lord imageries kind of have that.
Yeah,
You
it's
get that feel
everywhere.
here. So I'm going to start with reading Zechariah 13 because it's shorter and my voice is the more I talk, the more I'll cough. So I'll give you chapter
Okay.
14.
Thank you.
All right.
No, I'm happy.
I'm reading from the ESV. We are in Zechariah 13, and on verse 1 it says, "On that day there shall be a fountain open for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness." And that's kind of what we've been working up to, is this idea of
Yes.
purification. So, but on that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land, so they shall be remembered no more. And also I will remove from the land the prophets and the spirit of uncleanliness. And if anyone again prophesies, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, "You shall not live, for you speak lies in the name of the Lord." And what was the punishment for a prophet who spoke lies, Edwin?
Well, they didn't hang around much
Well,
longer,
and
did they?
so what we're seeing is the ultimate judgment on what God has been.
We're gonna order. We're going to bring on. We're not having this. We can't
Yeah,
have
and I
that.
think he's let it, he kind of lets it go on too long, so to speak.
This is a tying up of loose ends
Yeah,
chapter.
yeah. And so, and his father and mother who bore him shall pierce him through when he prophesies. Even his own family is going to speak against him. On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his vision. When he prophesies, he will not put on a hairy cloak in order to deceive, but he will say, "I am no prophet. I am a worker of the soil. For a man sold me in my youth." And if one asks him, "What are these wounds on your back?" he will say, "The wounds I received in the house of my friends." And so it's almost like this purge, this purification that happens, and these prophets are going to bear the marks.
They get the
Yeah.
picture too. After that, folks are not really wanting to line up with that kind of an
No.
identification.
And so verse 7, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish. 1/3, there's my son, 1/3 shall be left alive. I will put this third into the fire, refine them as one refines silver, and test them as gold is tested. They will call upon my name. I will answer them. I will say, These are my people. They will say, The Lord is my God. So, this fire, one of the things that I try to impress upon people when they see fires of destruction, especially from God, it's normally not a wanting to destroy, but wanting to purify.
No,
And
but it serves a purpose as
yeah,
well. That is
and it's
here.
a testing ground. Peter talks about, we have to be reproved by fire. And unfortunately, sometimes we take that hard route, don't we, Edwin?
Oh yeah, and John the Baptizer, when he's talking about many of these same things, that there's going to have to be a purging to get us down to some people who have been refined and can now take it up and
Yeah.
go with it.
And so not only are we refining the nation, but even the remnant themselves need refined, right?
Yes,
I've al-
yes. That's a, it's important because the remnant come back to the land. but they're still not ready
I've
to go.
always found, the more I read, the remnant were not people who did no wrong. They were the ones, when the discipline comes, recognize what this is about.
Yes, yes, they start to get the picture, and then they go through often some further refining, as we're
Yeah.
seeing here, because God has work to do, and He can't do it with people who aren't on the same page and with the
Nope.
program.
So that's kind of chapter 13. And then I'm going to let Edwin take over chapter 14.
Behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, women ravaged, and half of the city exiled, and the rest of the people will be cut off from the city. So Jerusalem's going to take a hit. There are ways we can look at this that are going to happen in the destruction of Jerusalem before the gospel really starts to break free of Judaism and starts to expand even further. But the Lord is coming against where his people are because they have become a
Yeah.
hindrance. And when they get out of the way, it's not going to be because they're going to their law of Moses or their ethnicity. It's because they've come to find a new king.
Judgment's going to start in the house of the Lord.
Yes,
So,
yes. Um, In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. This is an interesting one coming up, which is in the front of Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half of the mountain will move toward the north, the other toward the south. You will flee by the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach to Azel. Yes, you will flee just as you fled before the earthquake. That earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him. So we've got God coming in judgment. We've got the heavenly group that he keeps company with joining him. This is a big deal.
well, we've already seen this heavenly, the angels being sent out from the four corners. They're the ones assessing where the world's at. And so they are a part of God's judgment and his hand of judgment.
Yes. And then when you bring all these things together, one of the things you find out is this is big stuff. What's happening here is pretty monumental.
Yeah. Jesus,
In that day,
Go ahead. I
Buckle,
was going to say Jesus in, Second Thessalonians chapter 1 talks about when Jesus comes, he's going to come with his flaming, in flaming fire with his angels. So they're definitely a part of this judgment.
yes. In that day, there will be no light. The luminaries will dwindle, for it will be a unique day, which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night. But it will come about that at evening time there will be light. This is some common apocalyptic type literature that only on one occasion that I can absolutely be sure of in 2 Peter 3 is it actually talking about the physical end of the material end of this universe. Otherwise, it's using language that's like that because it partakes of the grand judgment, these limited ones that come along. And this would be one of the big ones, based on the same principles as final judgment, where God is refining. And then one day, things like this will
Well, a
literally
lot of
happen.
times when we read stuff like this, Edwin, we always jump to final judgment. And this, once again, final judgment actually takes images just from God's ordinary judgments that have happened throughout. Honest, when I say ordinary, I don't mean ordinary in
Yeah.
the everyday sense, but when God has judged.
It's just, we got very small things that God comes against to judge that uses all this uh, sun, moon,
Cosmic.
stars, constellations, everything.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's
Well, I find it
symbolic.
interesting that it talks about the earth going dark, but then at evening light. And you have the shepherd being struck, the one who's being pierced. I can't help but think of Jesus. And once again, if we bring Malachi into this, a part of Jesus coming is both judgment, but also bringing the grace and mercy of God. So the judgment comes, but with the judgment comes the
Yes.
refinement of the remnant.
Yes. Malachi draws attention to the fact that they wanted the day
Yeah.
to come when the temple would be occupied again, but he cautions, are you really ready for that day? And in fact, they
No.
really weren't.
No.
Again, in that day, one of his phrases that he uses a lot. In that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, and the other half toward the western sea, and it will be summer as well as in winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth on that day. The Lord will be the only one, and his name, the only one. So we're getting everything's coming together under one king in one kingdom. We're not going to just have Israel in a limited geographical proximity. This is going to be the whole shooting
When waters
match.
flowing out of Jerusalem sounds a whole lot like the garden imagery, that God has been trying to restore.
Isn't it amazing how what we first encounter in the scriptures is something that winds its way all the way through to the end of scripture, almost like there's a plan.
Design, right? Design.
And the Lord will be king over all the earth in that day. He's going to be the only one that there is, and the land will be changed into a plain from Gibra to Hinnon, south of Jerusalem, because it's a very rocky place over there, the Holy
Yeah.
Land. But Jerusalem will rise and remain on the site of Benjamin's gate, as far as the place of the first gate to the corner gate, from the tower of Haniel to the king's wine presses. People will live in it, and there will be no longer a curse, for Jerusalem will dwell in security. So the raising up, which is a symbolic thing again of prominence, and Jerusalem in its spiritual sense and what it signifies will
Yep.
dominate. Now, this will be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets. Their tongue will rot in their mouth. It will come about in that day that a great panic from the Lord will fall upon them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of one will be lifted against the hand of another. Judah also will fight in Jerusalem, and the wealth of the surrounding nations will be gathered gold and silver and garments in great abundance. So uh, again, spiritualizing, but there's some real earthly things that are going on that are somewhat symbolic. Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, in Rome, the destroyer that's coming is going to go down is actually a consequence of that,
Yeah.
I think.
And this whole Exodus, always goes back to this Egypt at the very beginning, Exodus. Where do they get all their gold and all the stuff that provides for them into the promised land? Is from the foreign nations.
Gifts,
And
donations,
God is,
yes. So they're basically financing God's
yeah,
movement
so when you're
here.
reading this and you're confused at one moment, it seems dark and gloomy, and then he'll switch in the middle of the verse to, be hope and salvation. It's going to be, as Paul says, like when the gospel goes out, a sweet smelling aroma for some, but the smell of death for others. And Jesus and what he offers is not for everybody. Not everybody will accept it, and those who don't, it's going to be a day of darkness and gloom, and those who do, greatest day you can imagine.
Exactly. And the things that make it great are things you can't see with the eye, but are based upon what God has said and are accepting those promises so that we can live with confidence even in the midst
Yeah.
of turmoil.
Yeah.
Judah will also fight. Oh, well, let me go down just a little bit. So, like this, the plague will be the plague on one horse and mule, the camel, the donkey, and the cattle, and all will be in those camps. Then it will come about that anyone who are left, the nations will that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year, to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and celebrate the Feast of Booths. That Feast of Booths is a pretty important one. It talked about it was to celebrate God caring for them in the wilderness as they got out of Egypt and went to the promised land. So symbolically, it has a lot to do with what's going on
Well,
here.
and interestingly enough, that when the Messiah comes, the one who's going to be pierced, he's not setting up a nation like they would. It's going to be like they're in the wilderness. You're going to be in amongst the nations, and you're going to have to rely that God is going to provide because once again,
You'll have your protected booth,
yeah.
if you will.
And so we're going to live like they did in the wilderness, but with God being our wall, protector, the sustainer, all those things. And we have to trust that God is the one sustaining us. So no matter what's going on in the country and culture around us, do we believe
Mhm.
that God is in control of those who humbly submit their lives to Him? Yeah.
Exactly. They didn't call it the wilderness for nothing
Yeah.
back in the day. And well, God knows how to take care of people when they're in circumstances that aren't that good. And it will be that whichever of the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there'll be no rain for them. Family of Egypt does not go to enter, then no rain will fall on them. It will be the plague which the Lord brings on the nations who do not go up to celebrate the feast of booths. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of the nations who do not go up to celebrate the feast of booths. So you're either with God or you're not. You're either behind this new king, this new shepherd, this universal way of looking at things where people can find security in God no matter what, or you're not.
Interestingly enough, the Feast of Booths is also around the time of the autumn equinox, where the days are are about to get shorter, and there's less and less rain, and they would actually take this
Yes.
time to pray for rain during the Feast of Booths because they know what season they're. So, and then Jesus comes during and at this feast, he talks about him being the
Mm-hmm.
living water. That if they drink from him, right, they'll never thirst, as he talked about in John 4, but also in John 7. And he was speaking of the Spirit that he would give, this life flowing Spirit that would live inside the people and never well up. And
First part of October, again, another festival oriented thing, but also time wise, is we're going to kind of hunker down, get through the winter, pray for rain, and look for
yep,
better days. In that day, they will inscribe on the bells of the horses, holy to the Lord. And the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like the bowls before the altar. Every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judea or in Judah will be holy to the Lord of hosts. And all who sacrifice will come and take of them and boil in them. And there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts that day.
so everything
So,
Israel does, even their food, is going to be holy, and God is going to have sanctified it. Almost kind of reminds me of Peter's vision in Acts 10, where he's told to eat unclean. He says, "I've never let anything unclean ever touch my lips." And God
no,
says, "Things that
exactly.
I have called clean, do not call unclean." And that's kind of what we're looking at.
It's those Jewish laws that talked about clean and unclean were all to be very symbolic as we apply them down the road to what God is going to be doing in the Messiah and how he is going to sanctify a people for his own
Yeah,
possession.
and they won't need to deal with the foreign nations for anything. I know yours says Canaanite, but the ESV says traitor, meaning God
Mm-hmm.
will provide all the things, and they won't need to rely, which they've always done, unfortunately, always relied upon foreign nations as allies, and God has always told them, stop, rely on me, turn to me.
Yeah, especially they're right there in proximity, and they were supposed to be driven out or subdued or whatever, and they were a thorn in the flesh because in some pragmatic ways, they felt like they kind of needed them
Yeah.
around. You know,
So we won't need nobody but the Lord, and all those who trust the
that's,
Lord will, no matter what it looks like and where they're at, God will be
mhm.
the one who provides and takes care and sustains, and that's something we can all.
So that's what they need
That's
today.
if you take nothing away from the book of Zechariah besides God is in control, and no matter if you're in the temple, right, out of the
Hmm.
temple, it's God's
Yeah,
spirit. If He's with you, I mean,
you're covered, you're sanctified, you're holy, you belong to Him. And even if death comes, you know what? That's not
and
the
that
end.
ultimately is the hope of the messianic kingdom that Jesus brings through the sacrifice of His blood, which allows those waters to flow out of Jerusalem and into all of the world.
There's a thing in Romans 6 that kind of goes along with this that basically is making the point if you're somebody's slave and you're dead, they don't own
Yeah.
you anymore. They can't get you to do anything anymore. So if you die to those kinds of things and become God's in the Christ, there's nothing those former things have over
Yeah.
you anymore.
Amen. All right, well, that is the book of Zechariah. And I know we didn't cover everything in detail, but hopefully, when I return, under certain circumstances,
Return. Oh,
that we
yes.
will be going through the book tying a nice little bow on it, hopefully. And so our job is to when you read it, at least get the most out
Hmm.
of it. Not tell you what everything means and every little detail, but just to help you in your reading to at least understand what is the overall point of what's going on. And so that's Zechariah,
Yeah, so
the
the
big
big
picture.
picture.
But anyway, as always, we love you and God
Yes, we
bless.
do. Bye bye.